Good evening, everybody. I'd like to talk to you today about my first submarine ride. I joined the military as a sonar technician on submarines. I went to school for a year and a half, and after a year and a half, I finally had my chance to get on a nuclear submarine and to actually go down into the water. The conditions when I lived on this submarine was for 90 days. I had to share all the amenities with 135 other people. I didn't even have my own bed. When I was working, there was a guy sleeping. And basically when he was working, I was sleeping. We called it hot racking. All the time we were basically on sea, we were on station. We didn't get the chance to look outside. We didn't get a chance to meet anybody else besides the people that were there. These are conditions today that most people would say, if they were in prison, would be unfair and uncruel punishment. It would be really, really bad, okay? And the funny thing is, I volunteered to do this stuff, all right? So I want to talk to you today about a volunteer military and how important it is and how effective it is. And I want to talk about a bad thing, reinstating the draft and how it can hurt the military. The draft is a process where everybody gets a number. When you turn 18, if you're a male that is, at that point in time when they call your number, congratulations, you joined one of the militaries, all right? You're going to go out, you're going to do something that you may not like, and they're going to make sure that you do it. So a lot of young people in the crowd here didn't maybe know what the draft was. So today I'd like to talk to you about military training. I'd like to talk to you about the unfair draft system, the size and the cost of the draft on the military, and basically the military leader's confidence in this process, okay? Before I do that though, I want to direct your attention to this chart. You can see right here, since 1956, going all the way to the present, the military force, all forces were up to 3 million people, had a little spike during Vietnam, and then basically have contributed down to now the military forces are at about 1.5 million. So does it really make sense to institute the draft when the military forces are as low as they have been? The draft was stopped in 1973 after the Vietnam War. And so when you look at the relative size of the military since then, you can see we've been doing very, very well as an all-volunteer force. All right. So the first point I'd like to talk to you about is military training for the volunteers. The bottom line is anything that you decide that you want to do, you're going to do really good with. If someone tells you to do something that you don't want to do, which is what the draft people were doing, obviously you're not going to be that effective. You're not going to be able to do that. So the training is really much more difficult for those that don't want to learn, and it becomes really hard to be effective after you've learned the training as a draft person at this point in time. So there's a web author out there by the name of Walter E. Williams from townhill.com, and he basically says that our all volunteer military force today has been the high quality and most effective with very few misfits in the process than ever before. And that misfits is basically because the draft is no longer involved. All right, let's talk about the second spot, the unfair draft system. All right, so in this situation we talked a little bit about what the draft was, but to be honest with you, it really wasn't fair. People that had a lot of money could evade the draft system by sending their kids to school for as long as it took. As long as you were pursuing education, they'd leave you alone and go for the people that weren't going. If you didn't have a lot of money and you didn't have a certain job, they would send you to the draft. And so these were unequitable, these were not fair opportunities. And of course the big one that still is an issue today, none of the women were considered to be part of the draft. So basically there is no fair opportunity with a draft. Whereas a volunteer, if you want to go, you can go. There are women in the military who have volunteered today and are enjoying a wonderful career. So looking at this, there's another web author, article called The People of Our Everyday Life, Rebecca Richards. She argues that privileged citizens have far more opportunities to escape conscription, which is basically the draft, such as through higher education or immigration. And so what she's saying is, if you have money, you have to find a way to get out of doing the draft. And that doesn't seem like it's really fair at all. So then we segue to the third point we want to talk about, and that's how the draft affects the overall cost and the size of the military. Okay? So what happens with a draft is that when you turn this age, you end up going in and doing your service. It could be for 6 months, it could be for a year, it depends on what the situation is. So the military will begin to swell, it will begin to grow. So there's some problems with the cost of maintaining that growth. Whereas in a voluntary force, if nobody else is volunteering, the military stays at that size. And then it grows as needed. It doesn't grow just because people turned 18. The costs are a lot less for a volunteer force versus a draft force. And then there's another issue. As this force gets larger, the political control might want to tend to use this large force to do something to justify its existence. And so at this point it becomes a concern. There's a 27-year Army veteran by the name of Alan Groupman who states, "We don't need a draft right now. And we don't want to put such a pool of people in the hands of politicians without requiring them to seek formal approval for the people's representatives." So what they're really saying is control for such a large size is a problem. All right, so the last point that I'd like to talk to you about is the confidence that the military leaders have in this process of the draft. So they feel like maybe some of you feel. We're dealing with military people who don't want to be here. If they run away, we have to find them, so the deserters are a problem, and then we have to put them in jail to serve them out of time because they actually ran away because they didn't want to serve their country. These issues become a real big problem. There is a general out there, actually a retired Army Major General by the name of Robert Scales, who says a draft would rush unprepared, undertrained, and poorly bonded soldiers into battle only to get them killed. And that is not a good situation. So in conclusion, we discussed military training, an unfair draft system, the effect of the size and the cost on the military system for a draft system, and our military leaders' lack of confidence with this draft. So all of these discussion points prove to me that a volunteer force is really the more effective opportunity to create a military than a draft. All right? There's no better military than the U.S. military, especially one that is full of volunteers. The draft should be considered only if there are no volunteers left in the system. And that's my view. Thank you very much.